generosity. Well, there's a comedy called Failure to Launch. Matthew McConaughey and Sarah Jessica Parker are in this, and Matthew plays this 35-year-old man named Trip, and he still lives with his parents. And his father says, he's 35 years old, he still lives in the house, this is not normal. What we have here, he says, is a failure to launch. So maybe you feel that similar pain. And he's talking to his parents, and Trip, the 35-year-old man played by McConaughey, says, the thing is, Mom and Dad, I've lived upstairs since I was 3, and it's been great. He doesn't want to move out, right? His friends say, isn't it kind of weird? You still live at home when you're 35 years old. He said, no, I like living at home. And they said, but you sleep in a twin bed with Superman sheets you've had since you were 6 years old, right? And so they're trying to get him to move out. That's the whole really thrust of the movie. Today we talk about adult children. I want you to stare at that phrase, adult children. That's an oxymoron, right? Are they adults or are they children? And the answer is yes. Those are my 2 sons who are adult children. So this morning we're talking to all of us today, and it's kind of like the older parent who said the first 40 years of parenting are the hardest. So you thought when they're 18 you were done. It continues through that. And parents are confused. Parents say, I don't feel like I know what my role is anymore. Parents say, I want my son to get a job. They say, every time I give advice to my daughter, she gets angry. All these difficulties navigating this time period. Young adults often think their parents treat them as children, and parents of those young adults think their young adult kids act like children. And so there's tension there. Today's topic is very important because you're going to spend more time parenting your adult children than you are from the time they're little ones into the teenage years until they're 18. You'll spend a lot more time parenting adult kids. And so if you have grown-up children, or if you have young children and you hope they grow up one day, then this message today is for you. We're concluding our series called Parenting Things. It's kind of a spin off the Netflix show Stranger Things, about this netherworld, this upside down world that's pulling people down. And we talked about the fact that that's not just fiction, it's fact. The Bible talks about our struggles not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil. And so there is this real world. We live in a scary and strange upside down world that's not always kid friendly, right? It's not always kid friendly. And so we got to figure out what we're going to do about living in this upside down world that's not always kid friendly. And one of the main really emotions many parents experience, we said in this series, is fear. And the majority of parents experience that. If you have kids who are drivers, you might have experienced these kinds of things, right? That's my 2 sons' cars, right? So it's a rite of passage. Poor Samuel, my oldest, he had this car for one day and he totaled it. Right there on Bell Boulevard, 183, the McDonald's is right there. He's driving down 183. Someone comes out eating a Big Mac, swerves into his lane. He drives off the road right into a tree. One day, totaled his car. So there you go. And that's why parents live in fear right there. And so there's this kind of fear, like, what are we going to do with our kids? And so we have this fear-based parenting with unhealthy and unproductive parenting styles of protective parenting and performance parenting and permissive parenting. We talked in the series about how that is not helpful, that's unproductive. We should not live in fear. We should have faith. We talked about faith-based parenting. It's preparation parenting. It's preparing our kids to love God so we can send them out as disciples in this world to make a difference. Not the emotional fear, but spiritual faith should drive our parenting. Because before we know it, they're going to be launching out. Stephanie Dyden works as our early life lead behind these walls over here with the little ones, and she uses a large jar to talk about the fact you only have basically 936 weeks from the time your child is born until they launch out. And she talks about how in week 1, they cry all night. In week 40, they stood up for the first time. Week 260, they begin kindergarten. Week 572, they enter middle school. Week 780, they get their driver's permit. Week 820, first date. And week 936, they graduate from high school. And they're gone. And she has these jars for her daughter. She takes a marble out every single week, and it's getting emptier and emptier, right? All the time. And so this is happening with our kids. We're going to be starting a new group in this January called Parenting Through the Phases that Stephanie Diden is going to be leading this discussion with parents. And so kind of as a follow-up to the sermon series on parenting, it'll be happening in January. You can scan that QR code on the screen and you'll get more information, read more about it, and you have a chance to sign up if you want to. And so I encourage you to scan that, get involved in that, be listening for that coming up here in January. Raising adult children, or at least parenting adult children, is not easy. There's a great book resource, Doing Life with Your Adult Children by Jim Burns. I read that last week. It's a great book. Encourage you to get it. It's filled with all kinds of practical helps that might help you more than we can talk about on a Sunday morning. But the bottom line is this: parenting adult children involves transitions. It involves transitions. For 2 decades, you're parenting a certain way, then all of a sudden you have to switch gears and you have to make certain transitions. Helen and I are just beginning this, and these transitions, by the way, start when they're teenagers, and they definitely blossom as they get in their 20s and they become young adults. And so some are easy, some are hard, but well, none are easy. They're all pretty hard, but some are easier than others. And we're only going to talk about 4 this morning, and the first one is their faith. Their faith. From my beliefs to their beliefs. Their faith has to transition from my beliefs to their beliefs. And we've been Deuteronomy 6 in this whole series. It's kind of our foundation text, key text passage for this series. They're leaving their wandering time in the desert. They're going into the promised land, filled with potential, filled with problems. And it's not God-fearing, it's not God-friendly, it's not child-friendly. And so they're trying to figure out, how do we bring our kids and raise our kids up in this upside-down world we're about to go into? So Moses tells them, here's how to do it in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 6:1, these are the commands, decrees, the laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you. This is preparation parenting. If you do these things, you will have a long life. It will go well with you. He's talking here about preparing them for what they're going into in this new world, this upside-down world. If you don't just want to survive but want to thrive, here's how to do it. Then he goes on in verse 5 to say, love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These are the commands I give you, and they are to be on your heart, he says. So love God with all that you are, and it's to be on your heart. You're to possess this love for God. We've been talking almost every week in this series about having a love for God, possessing that love, because our kids are going to watch us. Parents, it starts with us. If we want our kids to have a faith, we have to have a faith. If we want them to love God, we have to love God, because our kids do what we do. Back in 2007, I was one of the counselors on our kids' day camp, and my son Daniel there was only about 8 years old at the time, and during lunchtime, I took the greatest chip ever invented called Funyuns, right? And if you can see or not, I put a Funyun on my nose there. And my son thought it was really funny, and he tried the same thing over here, right? And the reason he did that, why? Because his dad did it. Our kids do what we do. If we want our kids to possess faith, we have to also possess faith. Later on that camp, when I was worshiping God, right? And he's worshiping God, right? Our kids will follow our lead. So if we want them to love God, we have to love God ourselves. He goes on here in Deuteronomy to say in verse 7, impress, he says, impress them on your children. These commands are to be on your heart. Love God with all that you are. You possess it, then you impress it on your children. We talk in the series about how to do that. Anytime, anywhere, any way I can, through modeling and methods and moments and milestones, I take the faith I possess and I impress it upon my children. Our children must eventually own their faith. They've got to own it. There's a big move now, a lot of talk about deconstructionism and a lot of fear about deconstructionism. I actually think deconstructionism is a positive thing. That's this idea that our teenagers and 20-somethings are deconstructing their faith. Now, if they deconstruct their faith and leave it there, that's not good. But if they deconstruct the faith you gave them and reconstruct their own faith in light of Scripture, that's a good thing. because they have to kick tires and push back on what you've handed them and make it their own. And so it's almost like this relay, right, baton. You have to possess it, then you have to impress it. You have to possess a love for God, possess it first yourself, parent, and then impress it on your children. We can give our children our brokenness, or we can give our children blessing. We have to decide what that is. I encourage you to possess a love for God, allow Him to transform your brokenness into blessing as much as possible, and try to pass that and impress that on to your kids. Help them own their own faith. We've already talked about that, but it's a major transition that you have to make in parenting young adults. The second one is their maturity. So we start with their faith, and then we go to their maturity, from dependence to independence. Luke 2, verse 40 talks about Jesus. The child grew and became strong. Verse 52, Jesus grew both in body and in wisdom, gained favor with God and people. He grew in body, he grew physically. In wisdom, he grew mentally. In favor with God, he grew spiritually. In favor of people, he grew socially. He grew in all different types of areas into an independent adult. The Gospel of Mark tells us he took up the trade of carpentry, probably learned from his father Joseph, and so he learned some necessary life skills. Our adult children must be encouraged to mature, become independent, develop a sense of competence, work hard, and experience the joy of accomplishment. They must go from dependence to independence. You have parents who complain, right, that their kids are acting like children, adult kids, and you have adult children who are complaining their parents are treating them like children. There's this tension between dependence and independence. The good news is most of our kids will grow up and become independent. Psychologists call it individuation. Individuation. They must learn to differentiate themselves and grow up and be distinct from mother and father, right? I can't have me until I have not me. I know what not me is. I'm not you, I'm me. And we began to individualize and develop our own identities, and we separate from mom and dad. We bonded for so long, had a shared identity, and now they're breaking off and becoming their own individuals. The Bible talks about this way back in Genesis 2:24. That's why a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, the two will become one flesh. Jesus quotes this in the Gospels. It's a biblical principle. If you want to have a successful marriage, you must leave home first. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, relationally, financially, right? You have to leave home. That's not just a case for marriage, it's a case for healthy adulthood. Every child has to leave home and go from dependency to independence. And that's very important that they make that transition. Parents must release their adult children to become responsible. To become responsible. Now, this requires something of the adult child and something of the parent. The adult child has to become responsible, and the parent has to release that adult child. And there's this inverse proportion. As the adult child becomes more responsible, it's easier for the parent to release them. If the adult child is not being very responsible, it's hard for the parent to release them. And so we have to understand that. It goes both ways. And for the parent, the more you're willing to release your adult child, the more responsible they can become. The less we release our adult children, the less responsible they become, and they become more dependent on us. Our children cannot become fully functioning adults if we still think of them as children who need us. I don't know how many adult parents, I'm talking about 50, 60, 70-year-old parents talking about how their kids need them. Each stage of parenting is not easy, but this is a very difficult stage. How do you let go of these children? For 2 decades, they depended on you. For 2 decades, you provided for them. Bonding has taken place for 2 decades. And now, though, you have to break that bond. And you have to allow them to go off on their own and cut the cord. And it is not easy for the parent, and it's not even easy for the adult child, but it's easier on them than it is the parent. to let that child go. So the parent has to learn to see the loss. They don't need me anymore. I was the center of the world for 2 decades. I'm not the center of the world anymore. There's a loss that has to be grieved. But you have to grieve that loss and allow your child to go, release that child to be a healthy individual. And it's challenging in our culture because we don't have a good defining marker of when that happens. You know? In the Jewish culture, you have bar mitzvahs, right? In the Hispanic culture, at least for girls, you have quinceañeras. I mean, you have these rites of passages. We don't really have that so much in our American culture, but we do kind of whenever a child graduates from high school and they go off to college or enlist in the military or go to trade school or go into the workforce. That's kind of the rite of passage. And when it comes to adult children, we are to care for them, but not take care of them. You need to stare at that point because it's very important. We are to care for them. We're nurturing. We're supportive, right? But we are not to take care of them, reverting back to the first 2 decades where we're doing things for them and providing them with so many things. It's good, actually, to care for them. It's not good to take care of them. Now, I'm assuming in making these statements, you don't have a special needs child. I'm assuming you don't have a child with special circumstances. And Mom, I can't cook, by the way, is not a special circumstance. I'm assuming you have a child who's able to become independent and self-manage and live on their own. It doesn't mean you never help your kids out. You can help them out, just don't bail them out. You can help them out sometimes, don't bail them out all the time. They got to learn to carry the weight of these things. And if we're enabling them too much, we can be caring, but just not enable dependency, right? We don't want to enable that. If we do that too much, they can end up we can create irresponsible, entitled, even narcissistic type children if we're not careful. So here's the bottom line. Don't do for them what they can't do for themselves. Don't do for them what they can do for themselves. They're trying to move from dependence to independence. If you have a boomerang child in your house who's left and boomerang back, we were laughing at that failure to launch, but that failure to launch syndrome is real. If you have adult children living in your home, and sometimes they come in different seasons for different reasons that are very valid, by the way. If they are living in your home, you need to have some expectations. If you're going to live here, you have to work or be working on an education or be doing both. If you're going to live here, you have to contribute to the household. This is not a hotel. You've got to help with chores, and you have to wash clothes and do dishes and those kinds of things. Don't clean for them or cook for them or do laundry for them on a regular basis. Don't pay their way. They buy their own gas. They pay for their own insurance. They buy their own clothing, right? They must honor the moral standards of your house. You can't micromanage what your adult kids do out there, but if adult kids are living under your roof, you can say, this is my house, and this is what we do here. And you can establish a timeline with goals for when they might be on their own, and they work toward that. And we hear all kinds of excuses when we tell parents that. I hear parents say things like, my son never learned how to cook. If I don't cook for him, he'll starve, or eat fast food all the time. Well, he just might have to do that, right? She doesn't know how to do laundry. If she does her own laundry, she'll ruin all of her clothes. Well, she might have to ruin her clothes because you have to teach her to be independent, not dependent upon you. And I know it's complicated, and I get all that, but parents oftentimes complain their kids aren't more independent while they're doing all these things for their kids. Why should they be independent? They got a good deal. You're doing everything for them. You have to start pulling back. I love the biblical principle in Galatians 6:2 and Galatians 6:5, 6:2. Carry each other's burdens. In this way you fulfill the law of Christ. 6:5. For each one should carry their own load. For years I would think, man, that sounds like a contradictory statement, but it really isn't if you look at it carefully. These are good boundaries that the biblical writer is putting up for us. The idea of carrying each other's burdens. The word for burden speaks of a heavy load, excessive weight. It speaks of heavy toil. Think of a boulder. No one should be expected to carry a boulder by themselves. So you help someone else carry the boulder. You carry each other's boulders. You get all under the weight, right? That's being responsible to others. But verse 5 says each one should carry his own load, not burden. The word there is load. It speaks not of heavy toil, but daily toil. The basic responsibilities that only a person themselves can do. Don't think of a boulder, think of a backpack. You are to carry each other's burdens, but everyone carries their own backpack. This is, by the way, is a good definition of adulthood, right? I'm responsible to others and for myself. This is how our kids become adults. Son, you're responsible to others. If they have a burden, you help carry that burden. If they have a boulder, you help carry that burden. You're responsible to them. You are your brother's keeper. But son, you're responsible to carry your own backpack. You're responsible for yourself. And problems arise in this world when we have people, and we see them all the time trying to carry their own boulders. Oh, I got it, I'm good. And they're not good at all, they're about to collapse. We have to get under to help carry that burden. Problems also arise in our world. We have people carrying backpacks going, will somebody please carry my backpack? It's heavy. And parents, I have a word for you today. Have your kids carry their own backpacks. Some of you are doing a lot of backpack carrying. I mean, I'm not talking about your kindergarten kid. I'm talking about your 20-something. They need to carry their own. That's not a boulder. It's a backpack. And they got to carry their own backpacks. That's part of adulthood. They're responsible to others, but for themselves. Certain responsibilities they do themselves. Parents can't cling to their children, and children can't cling to their parents. Failing to release our adult children says more about our needs than their needs. Now we're just getting real. Now we're getting real. There is a need to be needed, and too many parents are holding on too tightly because they need to be needed. But parents cannot cling to kids, and kids cannot cling to parents, must raise them on to adulthood. Their faith, their maturity. Thirdly, my role. My role must change from a commander and a coach to a counselor and a consultant. Commanders and coaches are in pretty much full control. Counselors and consultants lose control. When they're little, you're their commander, right? When they're itty-bitty, you decide when they eat, when they sleep, when they go potty, right? You're in charge of all that when they're little. You are the commander. If you're wise, when they go into adolescence and teenage years, you go from commander to coach. You're still in charge. You're still the boss, but they have more autonomy now. But whenever they graduate from high school, sometime during that time period, right, I want you to think about this. They're old enough to die for their country. When they get to that age, you cannot be a commander and a coach anymore. You got to transition to counselor and consultant. And it's kind of like the old show, The Apprentice, right? You've been fired. I must realize that I was fired, but I can be rehired. We all were fired. And if you don't think you were fired, that is why you have conflict with your adult child. Because you actually think you're still a commander and coach, and really you're supposed to be a counselor and a consultant. Because when you have a counselor or consultant, they're not in charge. In fact, you have to seek them out. The counselor doesn't call you and go, come see me, I got something to tell you. No, you seek the counselor out. You seek the consultant out. And then you listen to them, and you might do what they say, or you might not do what they say, and that's okay. Because you're not commander and coach anymore. You're counselor and consultant. You have to earn the right to be heard. Well, I've raised them for 20 years. I think I've earned the right. You might think that. That makes perfect sense. It just doesn't work that way. The way you earn the right to be heard is let them go, but be available. Like any other mentor, you can't force influence on someone. You have to be invited into their lives. We must be okay with losing control and allowing our kids to invite us back into their lives. We've been fired, as commander and as coach, but can be rehired as counselor and consultant if we're wise. You will apply for the job. If you don't get the job right away, just hang on for a while, keep the application in. When they go through a difficult season, you might be surprised. You might get a phone call. But it's coming from them and not from you. They're growing up, they're getting independent, and they're learning how to do this. Ephesians 6:1 says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother." We saw this a few weeks ago, this idea, this outward action of obeying parents, this inward attitude of honoring parents, built on Exodus and built on Deuteronomy, the Ten Commandments that are part of our text for the series. But it's very interesting what Paul does, both Old Testament and New Testament. When he says honor parents, it's just a blanket statement. It really gives, in those statements, there's no age limitation in honoring parents. But when it comes to obeying parents, Paul puts children up there, and the word for children means young children, dependent children. The reality is our adult children are called to honor us, not obey us. Little children have to obey parents, but adult children don't have to obey, but both little children and adult children must honor parents. So honoring does not cease when a child becomes an adult, but obeying parents does. And that's why you parents of adult children, please stop telling them what to do. They don't have to do what you say. Adult child's happy about that one. I'm not sure where their parents are. They're somewhere in the house maybe. It's getting ready to go down right here. It's getting ready to happen. Not only is it not biblical, it doesn't work. Right, adult parents? Have you noticed, older parents, you notice your kids, you can't order them anymore. We want them to be so independent. Will you please grow up? If they're going to be independent, they cannot be dependent on your direction. You cannot order them. You have to reinvent the relationship. Practically speaking, what does it look like in practical terms? It means you have to stop giving unsolicited advice. Now, when I'm preaching to me. I'm sitting right there talking to myself because Helen and I violate this all the time. We are trying to learn not to give unsolicited advice. It's kind of like the mother who says, "Why does my daughter have to go all the way to Europe to discover herself? She can stay right here. I'll tell her all about it," right? Well, she don't want to hear from you. She wants to learn on her own. Withholding advice goes against the very nature of a parent because for 2 decades, our muscle memory has been, we must tell them what to do. And now we have to pull back on that. Jane Isay, in her book with a great title, Walking on Eggshells, Navigating the Delicate Relationship Between Adult Children and Parents, talks about giving advice to your adult kids. She says, don't give it, they don't like it, they don't want it, they resent it. No matter how well-meaning it is, when we give advice to our adult kids, they take it as criticism. They take it as criticism, or we're critiquing something about them. Adults don't like people telling them what to do. Would you agree with that? Adults don't like people telling them what to do. If you want your child to be an adult, they're not going to like people telling them what to do. One of the greatest things you can do is stop telling them what to do. This means you ask open-ended questions, you have dialogue, you talk with them, not at them. You have a conversation, not a lecture. Just in case you're confused about that, conversation has 2 people talking. Lecture has 1 person talking like I'm doing right now. That's not what you do when you're talking to your adult child. You're encouraging, you're not intrusive, right? You hold your tongue. I talked about Jim Burns' book earlier. On the screen here you see it. Doing Life with Your Adult Children. Look at the subtitle. Keep your mouth shut and the welcome mat out. I love that. Keep your mouth shut and the welcome mat out. It's great advice. Be available, but you're not a commander and coach anymore. Keep your mouth shut. Keep the welcome mat out. You want to come see me? I'll be your counselor. You want to come see me? I'll be your consultant. You have to navigate that, abstain from giving that advice. Because here's the reality. I don't care how important you think it is. And if it's really important, you might have to say something. I get that. But most of the time, it's not that important. There is a high cost to good advice. And here's the high cost. It hurts the relationship. The high cost of giving good advice to your adult kids is it hurts the relationship. So I don't care how good it is. It's probably going to hurt it. So you have to factor in how important is this really. And usually it's not that important. Well, how do I do this new role? How do I do this? Here's what you have to do. Trust that experience is a better teacher than advice. And by the way, this should start when your kids are teenagers. As you move into coaching mode, it's not always what you tell them. You let them live with the consequences of their actions. Deuteronomy 11:2 says, remember today what you have learned about the Lord through your experiences with him. We have experiences and we learn from our experiences. Galatians 6:7, don't be misled. You will always reap what you sow. Natural consequences are always the best teacher. Do you believe in the law of the harvest or not? Do you believe that people reap what they sow? God has certain laws, certain principles that he's built into the creative order. And the reality is, when you go with those principles, you tend to do well with consequences. You go against those principles, you stumble through consequences. And our kids bearing the weight of their consequences from their decisions, that weight, those consequences are a better teacher than anything you'll tell them. But here's the truth. Here's the problem. We don't want our kids to bear the consequences. If they do that, then this is going. We know where it's going, don't we? We know the law of the harvest. They're going to reap what they sow. I don't want them going through that. So I'm going to start telling them, you can do that with a 5-year-old, but a 25-year-old, zip it and watch. And it's so hard because we don't want them getting hurt, losing money, struggling. It's hard. And sometimes it takes great discernment and wisdom. When do I step in? When do I pull back? But the reality is we have to let our kids learn from experience. We must trust that experience is a better teacher than advice. We have to believe that. And so I must transition from a parent-child relationship to an adult-adult relationship. You got to start seeing them eye to eye, not one down. The great benefit of moving to a parent or to an adult relationship from a parent-child relationship is you have a deeper friendship with your adult child. Because you're not controlling them anymore, trying to tell them what to do anymore. Now you're having a conversation with them. They can move away from your control, but still have access to your influence. They can move away from your control, but still have access to your influence. No longer are you a commander or coach. Now you are a counselor and a consultant. And that's the relationship that needs to happen. So stop trying to change your adult children. Instead, change your job description. You're working way too hard. Release them, that they might be responsible. Next one is my perspective. Their faith, their maturity, my role, and my perspective. From the children I expected to the children I have. Now, if you have older kids, you know where I'm going with this. Because when your kids are younger, you expect them to be a certain way, and they get older, and a parent of an adult child has to realize I have to parent not the ones I thought I would have, I have to parent the ones I actually do have. And there's joy in that, and there's sorrow in that. They become things sometimes we never dreamt of. We go, wow, I never imagined that. Other times you kind of cringe, oh. But you can't parent a fantasy. You can't parent a dream. You got to parent who they are. And too many parents are holding on to some dream, some fantasy, and it's affecting their ability to parent who's right in front of their face. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he will not turn from it. It's one of the great promises of the Proverbs. It's not really a promise so much as a truism. Proverbs are not guarantees, but they are truisms. They're general realities. If you live a certain way, follow this proverb, most likely this will happen. But there are different ways of interpreting this proverb. The most common way is the idea if I raise my kids in the faith, they might stray and struggle, but they'll eventually return to it. That's a great truism. And I believe that with all of my heart. But Hebrew scholars are in debate on how to translate this because it can be translated a different way. And the other way is reflected, for example, in the Amplified Bible that says, train up a child in the way he should go and in keeping with his individual gift or bent. In the Hebrew, it literally says, train up a child according to his bent, his manner, his way. As a New American Standard Margin translation says, train up a child according to his way. Or New Jerusalem Bible, give a lad a training suitable to his character. In other words, it's about looking at the bent and mannerism of your child and raising your child in that way. Just as a hunter is looking for a certain kind of stick to create a bow, a certain stick that has a certain pattern of grain and a certain bent to create the good bow, they're mindful of the bent. As parents, we should be mindful of the bent. How is our child bent? What direction are they going? Do you know, parent, your child's not supposed to be like you? Why can't my child just be normal like me? I got news for you. You ain't normal. And beyond that, God has not called your kids to be like you. He's called them to be like He's called them to be. They have a certain bent. And we have to consider, I parent my child according to who they are, not who I wanted them to be. According to who they are, not who I wanted them to be. They have a certain personality. They have a certain primary love language. They have a certain passion or giftedness, perhaps. God does not mass produce anything. God does not make Mac children. Each child is fearfully and wonderfully made. And by the way, this applies to you, those of you little kids. You need to parent the child according to their bent, how God has wired them. Not according to your interests, but their interests. Not your goals, but their goals. And most importantly, God's goals. Right? My son Samuel, my oldest, he always loved the outdoors, and that's 2010. He's 14. We're in Big Bend National Park, and we both climbed up 8,000 feet, this high peak, and we had a great. We hiked, we climbed, we did all that together. It was a great time, and that's the bent. I go, I like that bent, right? Our kids have bents. You go, I like that bent, But my kid also fell in love with music. Taught himself how to play guitar, taught himself how to play bass, right? He did all these different bands, right? And the music he chose to fall in love with is called hardcore, AKA screamo. You know why it's called screamo? They scream. They don't even sing, they scream. That's not my bent. And you got to decide as a parent, like, is it your bent or my bent? And part of parenting our kids is applauding who they are. God didn't make you like me, He made you like you. And I don't know why you like that screamo. And by the way, I've enjoyed to actually appreciate the genre. I actually have some of them. I listen to myself now. He promotes concerts, he's in bands, he does all of it, and he's opened my world up, and it's kind of a fun thing, right? I like what Judith Virus said. She says, letting our children go and letting our dreams for our children go must be counted among our necessary losses. Part of letting your children be independent and letting them go is letting your dreams go that you had for your children. God loves you, but I have a plan for your life, right? No, He loves them. He has a plan. And it's a necessary loss to let them go. So I live as a sin person. I go into their world and not expect them to come into my world. That's very important. We talked about being sent people. As the Father sent me, so I'm sending you. We live a bold life by being sent people. Be a sent person. Go into your child's world. Don't expect them to come into your world. Learn about their culture. Learn about their music. Learn about their interests. The biggest mistake I see parents of teenagers make, as kids get more autonomy, they kind of let them go, and the kids kind of go off. No. Stay sent. Go into their world. Learn more about them. Be a part of their world. They say they don't want you there, but when Helen and I show up to Samuel Screamo concerts, he always loves that we're there. all the whole crew knows there's Samuel's parents. Here they are. Meet them in their territory. And I'm going to close with one last thing. That is this: my prodigal. What do I do when my child strays? Our adult children will violate our values. They will make poor choices like we made poor choices. They'll get into trouble, and when this happens, sometimes we really begin beating ourselves up, like what happened, and if I'd only been a better parent, if I would only prayed more, if I would only taught them more, if I wouldn't have argued so much with them, or we start beating ourselves up, we paralyze ourselves, and we lose confidence. And there's something about adult child squandering their potential that breaks the heart of every parent. And some of you are sitting in those seats, you've lived there, and you've been a part of that, you don't know what to do. But I just want to tell you, there are good parents who have children who make poor choices. And there are bad parents who have kids who make good choices. It's not always a reflection. In fact, most of the time it's not a reflection on your parenting. So we need to back off of that. This next generation, this Gen Z generation, studies tell us that the number of atheists among Gen Zs has doubled in the past years. And it's a challenge that every parent is dealing with. Now, I've told the story, I think in the opening message, maybe in the series, about Daniel. And my Daniel came to faith young, baptized him, had a heart for God, loved Jesus, was always, worshiping and praising God through elementary school and middle school. But man, he loved science. And he got into high school and started getting exposed through YouTube, through Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, some of the other more evangelistic atheists, and who basically have one line, that is this, that if you believe in science, you don't need God. And for a kid who loves science, he's having a hard time with that. And the church, by the way, hasn't helped. When the church puts science and faith against one another, we're part of the problem. They complement. They're not combative. They complement one another. But the reality is that he started believing, I believe in science, and so maybe they're right. I don't need God anymore. I still remember when he was I can't remember if he's a freshman or a sophomore. I think he was the end of his freshman year, early sophomore year. 6'2", tells us in tears that he's not sure he believes in God anymore. And it was hard. I mean, he was crying, I was crying, we're all hugging. Helen's worried, and you know what? We kept praying for him. We kept the relationship open. We were reading books together and talking, and goes off to college and still having this struggle. But I told Helen, I said, don't worry about it. All Dale needs to do is meet a Christian smarter than him, and we don't qualify. And goes off to college, meets Dr. Garcia, who is smarter than him, and everything began to change. Through a series of events, personal things in his life as well, all these things came together and created this perfect reality for him where he turned back. And now he graduated from A&M with honors in physics, honors in philosophy. He actually wants to get his PhD in philosophy and actually be on a public state university as a professor who offers a positive view of faith in God. So he's gone from that to this in 5 years, but some of you have waited 10 years. You have not seen it. 15, 20. It's different for everyone. The time period is different for all of us, but sometimes our kids struggle, and it's difficult when that happens. And I want to encourage you, when that happens to you, don't beat yourself up. Helen and I beat ourselves up many times, but it doesn't help you, it doesn't help them. You guys stay focused not on the past of what you did wrong, but in the present and the future. You need to pray for your child, love your child, encourage your child. And you need to find some support to talk. Because if you're angry and disappointed, when our children violate our values of our home and our beliefs, we can feel betrayed and hurt and frustrated, and that angst comes out on them. So find someone else to talk to so you're not going to dump that on your kids. We have a group we're starting. If you want more info about about loving a prodigal, we're starting a group sometime in the new year. You can scan this code up here. If there's a prodigal in your life, we'll put you on a list, and we'll talk about it when we can get together and support one another. If you have a prodigal, I'd love to be able to get some of us together and share some community and support for one another. But there is no powerful, really, example of redemption, I believe, than the story of the prodigal son. And Luke, and you have this father has two sons, and one goes off, takes all the inheritance, squanders it in distant land. Jewish man taking care of pigs, shouldn't be doing that, came to his senses, and he comes home. And it says in Luke 15:20, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. I love that when he was still a long ways off, the father always kept the relationship open. Always looking for a son to return home. It's called the story of the prodigal son. It should be called the story of the loving father who is constantly watching. So here's some principles. I always leave the relationship open so I will never lose my influence in my adult child's life. I do not know why parents, I think because we feel betrayed and we're afraid, but way too many parents get angry at their kids and push their kids away. Do not do that. Leave the relationship open. Never lose influence in their life. They need to know they always can come home. They always can come home. It might be too late for prevention. It's not too late for redemption. They can come home. You leave that door open. Nothing is more important than your influence in their life. No matter what they're doing, you leave the relationship open as far as you're concerned. I realize there might be tough love. I realize there might be boundaries in place. If there are addictions or lifestyle choices that are very destructive, I realize all these natural consequences are going to be there. But through all of that, you have to have a loving posture toward your kids. When there is nothing else, all you have is your loving influence. And you've got to keep that. I resist becoming a one-topic parent who only focuses on what my adult child is doing wrong. Don't do that. So many adult parents of adult kids who are straying, the whole relationship is defined by the bad decisions of their kids. But here's the reality. Your kid's not the sum total of their mistakes. Your child is a whole and healthy person, maybe not healthy, but a whole person created in the image of God, and they are more than just their mistakes. So you love the child in them. You love the child of God in them, and you reconnect with them relationally. You go beyond all the problems and see the whole person. So you are loving toward them. You don't have the one topic conversation all the time with them. They know you disapprove. Focus on the relationship, right? Instead, without enabling or celebrating sin, give unconditional love. Don't enable, don't celebrate, but give unconditional love. You don't have to have a big party if you disagree with what they're doing, but you always need to have unconditional love. Remember the power of love. And that's hard because some parents are tempted to celebrate and tempted to, enable, and don't do that. But always leave the room open for a loving relationship with them, because every child is wanting to know, do you still love me? When my son told me, I'm not sure I believe in God anymore, his first question was, Dad, do you still love me? And my answer was, yes, I love you. Nothing will ever change that I love you. We stumbled, they're going to stumble, and God's a great example of unconditional love. Don't we have a God of unconditional love who loves us beyond what we do? And so we model that for our kids. It's a storyline of the gospel: creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And you say, you know what? I realize you're in a bad spot, but there is redemption, there is restoration, and you love them. 1 Peter 4:8, above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. A multitude of sins. And so you say, you know what, no matter what sin, brokenness is there, love can cover it all. So you keep loving them. Nothing shall separate us from the love of Christ. You keep loving on them. And I love what 1 Corinthians 13:8 says, love never ends. And that's why, friends, parenting never ends. Parenting never ends because love never ends. And we're always loving them. Our children need to know no matter how far they travel away, there's always a path back home. There's always a welcome mat at the door because we love them. We have a prayer and care room back here. I encourage you to use it. I'm going to have a prayer. We're going to watch a video. We're going to give a few announcements. We'll be dismissed. But on your way out today, if you have questions about being a follower of Jesus, I'd love you to go to our prayer and care room for that. Father, I pray today, Lord, for all of our parents. Those little ones, all the way with those with older kids, Father. I pray you use this series to help us in our parenting. For those of us who have adult children that we're trying to parent, Father, I pray you would help us. That they would be able to go from our beliefs to their beliefs, from dependence to independence. That we would transition from commanders and coaches to counselors and consultants. Father, that we would parent the kids you've given us and who you called them to be, not the ones we thought we were going to have. And Father, when our kids stumble and fall, remind us that we too have stumbled, we have fallen. And Lord, remind parents you are always with them in these difficult seasons. May they continue to seek you for their adult children who are having difficulties. May we relinquish our adult kids to you. Those who are doing well and those who are struggling, we release them to you because you love them even more than we do. You can care for them more than we can, and we trust you with our kids. And so we give them away to you this day. Father, we thank you that love never ends. Thank you for loving us through Jesus Christ. And we pray, Father, that we would, just like you loved us in our brokenness, we would love our kids no matter what. We thank you for all this in Jesus' name. Amen.